Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Cambridge Union Society. It is my honor to open the Michaelmas term with this year's Deloitte debate. As some of you know, we've held this debate for the last few years, and it's been a huge success. For the students in the room, usually our debates are entirely student audiences, members' student audiences. However, tonight is an unusual event. As I said, we've held it once every year for the last 3 years. This is organized by Deloitte, and many of our guests are people in that industry. And this gives you a taster of the sort of debates we hold here at the Union. We held debates of all sorts. We've discussed politics to business, to sports, to the arts. Tonight's debate is on business. It's on the motion, this House believes too many businesses are only paying lip service to the green agenda. Now, in a short moment, I'll just go over quickly how the debate will run and who the speakers are. But before I do, I would just like to hand over to Andy Swarbrick, a partner of Deloitte, who helped organize this event. Andy?
Mr. President, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening and welcome. Yes, I'm Andy Swarbrick. I'm a partner in Deloitte in Cambridge, and on behalf of all of us at Deloitte, a very warm welcome to you and thank you for coming. My role tonight is very brief but very important, and that is to convey a number of thanks to the people that have helped make tonight happen. And my first thanks go obviously to Austin, President of the Union, and his standing committee for allowing us access, because this is fundamentally a private members club, and for us to be allowed in here is a real privilege, and to come into this hallowed chamber, which has got such a fantastic history, is absolutely brilliant. So thank you, Austin, and to your committee for allowing us in. Secondly, I'd obviously like to thank our speakers, who have valiantly agreed, been volunteered to speak tonight. I guess when I asked them 3 or 4 months ago, it all seemed a very good idea. I suspect 1 or 2 of them are thinking that maybe it wasn't such a good idea, but I'm sure they'll be brilliant, and I do thank them for giving up their time to prepare and to speak to us this evening, so that's great. Thanks also to Bill Bailey, the bursar of the Union, for his cooperation and help, and to all of his staff, James behind the bar and the team there. I think they've done us proud with the accommodation so far. Thank you also to the Deloitte team, particularly Linda, my secretary, who many of you will know, I think, and to Claire Campbell, our marketing manager, but to all the Deloitte people who've got involved, because an evening like this takes a huge amount of effort, as you can imagine, and they've been brilliant in helping that happen. And finally, a big thank you to all of you for making the effort to come. I know you're going to enjoy it. It's great fun, and I hope you'll join in, and I hope also you'll join us at the end for a drink while we await the result with bated breath. It will be fun, but thank you very much for coming. Thank you, Mr. President.
And thanks as well go to Andy Swarbrick, who besides being a partner of Deloitte is a trustee of the Union, which, as some of you will know, is a registered charity run and managed entirely by students, but overseen by a board of trustees. So thank you, Andy. Now, tonight's debate is British parliamentary style, which is, to put it simply, alternating speeches in proposition and opposition of the motion. Speeches will be 10 minutes each. Now, during those speeches, you as members of the audience are welcome and encouraged to interrupt the speakers with points of information, to challenge them and to hold them to point. Now, to make a point of information, you simply stand up or from your seat shout "point of information" or "on that point." Now, the 10 minutes are entirely the speakers to handle as they see fit. They can choose to hear your point, at which point they will get your attention, and you can ask your question or say what's on your mind. If, however, the speaker chooses not to hear your point, then we ask you please to sit down and allow the speaker to continue. They are limited to 10 minutes, and so they have to keep to that time, so that they'll be policing their own times. The first minute and last minute of each speaker's speech is protected, so it's only during the middle 8 minutes during which you could interrupt. After the first 4 speakers, there'll be an opportunity for you, members of the audience, to have your voices heard. We'll have rounds of speeches from you of 1 minute each, proposition, opposition, and abstention. And then the final 2 speakers will close off the debate for us. So without further ado, I'd like to invite up Craig Bennett, Director of Policy and Campaigns for Friends of the Earth, to open the debate with a proposition. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you to Deloitte and the Cambridge Union for inviting me to speak here tonight. The motion that is before us is that this House believes that too many companies are only paying lip service to the green agenda. Let's understand what the motion does not say. The motion does not say that all companies are only paying lip service. It does not even say that the majority of companies are only paying lip service to the green agenda. It just says too many companies are paying lip service to the green agenda. And this is important because I want to recognise right up front, and Friends of the Earth recognises, that there are many companies now doing good things. We're going to hear tonight from one of my colleagues about Interface and the extraordinary story of that company. Other famous stories, Patagonia. If you don't know the story, look it up on Google. It's an amazing story about what that company's been doing. If we go more mainstream, think about Marks and Spencer and their Plan A. You know, it is an impressive story that they've got there. Or B&Q's Net Positive, or Unilever's Sustainability Living Plan. These are all good things that are happening out there. And nothing I'm saying tonight is seeking to deny that. And some of you might have come here tonight to think, oh, there's someone from Friends of the Earth speaking, they're bound to be rabid anti-capitalist and anti-business activist. You know what, actually, Friends of the Earth now working with a small handful of companies on our campaigns. Take our Clean British Energy campaign. We've developed that in partnership with two energy companies, Ecotricity and Good Energy. And we're very much enjoying working hand in glove with them on that campaign. And earlier this year, we actually joined forces with a couple of solar companies, Solar Century and Home Solar, to sue the government when the government actually adjusted illegally the subsidies that they were supplying for solar power. The case went all the way to the Supreme Court and we won. It was immense fun. I really recommend it. If you've never sued the government before, do it. I've just turned 40 and I've done it 3 times in my life and I intend to do it again. It's a great thing to do. As long as you win, that is. For me personally, I've actually spent a good bit of my career lecturing in business schools around companies and the environment and actually working very closely with many companies on this agenda, on the corporate sustainability agenda. So neither myself nor Friends of the Earth are scared of working with companies, and we recognise there's good things happening out there. But you know what's interesting? In that corporate sustainability space that I know so well, we always come back to the same stories, the same examples. You know, pretty much the vast majority of business conferences on sustainability and environment you go to, it's the same old examples. Interface, time and again. If I hear the Interface story one more time, I'm going to, actually I better not say that because we're about to hear it. But Interface, time and again. Patagonia, time and again. Nowadays, M&S, time and again. Same old agendas on the same old conferences repeating these stories. That's not to say for a minute that we have any question about those. I have nothing but admiration for those stories. But the mere fact that those are pretty much the only stories out there about this shows that it's not the norm. Now here tonight in the House we have an expert bunch of people. You know, there's many people brought here by Deloitte tonight, many people working in the corporate sustainability space. And I reckon if we go to the bar afterwards and we try and brainstorm, what are the best examples? What's the longest list of examples we can think of companies doing great, deep green things in this space? We might get to around 30 or 40 companies. If we extend the definition a bit more generously and think about companies that are doing something innovative but not necessarily changing their whole business model, we might get to a few hundred. And even then we'd probably have to have a pretty healthy debate about how serious the change is. The thing is though, there's not just a few hundred companies in the world. According to the UN, there's 61,000 transnational corporations and 1 million foreign affiliates. And of course, many, many million more companies, smaller companies around the world. The truth is that for every Interface, for every Marks and Spencer, for every Patagonia, there will be countless companies that are only paying lip service. Take, for example, BP. Remember in the mid-noughties, as it's called, they had that multi-million-pound advertising campaign Beyond Petroleum. Did you know that at the height of that advertising campaign, around 75% of their capital investment was going into what? Fossil fuels. The advertising campaign was called Beyond Petroleum. 75% of their investment was into new fossil fuels. And then, of course, we had Deepwater Horizon, the biggest spill in US history. You know what was amazing about that, even beyond just the impact it had on the environment, of course, people's livelihoods in the Gulf of Mexico? It was that it was revealed afterwards that their oil spill emergency plan included a proposal highlighting the need to protect sea walruses. Now, these are an animal that aren't even found in the Gulf of Mexico. All they've done is cut and paste it from somewhere else and put it into the Gulf of Mexico. Similarly, their emergency plan also listed, here's the phone number, here's the name of someone that you call in an emergency if there's an oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico. Turned out, it was a wildlife expert who died 4 years before the plan was signed off. And this is a company that's, again, for a long time was held up as a leader in the sustainability field. Or take BAE Systems, who of course whose products are designed specifically to kill people as efficiently as possible, but we'll put that aside for a minute. They introduced a lovely corporate sustainability program last decade. What was one of the first actions it did? It made its bullets, wait for it, lead-free. Which is really handy. If you're going to get shot, at least you know your bullets are lead-free. Or take Shell, still gas flaring in Nigeria. Years after the Nigerian government tried to stop it, one of the biggest sources of greenhouse gas emissions in Africa. But you know, my main beef with Shell at the moment is they're actually exploiting climate change. They are rubbing their hands with glee as the polar ice melts. Why? Because they make it easier for them to gain access to the Arctic, and they want to massively expand drilling in the Arctic. You couldn't make it up. I wonder if their oil spill emergency plan for the Arctic talks about how to clean up badgers. It probably does. Anyway, I could go on with these kind of examples all night long. Don't worry, I won't, but I am in the bar afterwards. The truth is that for every one of these companies that are even just paying lip service, there are many more that can't even be bothered to pay lip service. Take Trafigura. 6 years ago, it dumped large quantities of toxic waste in the Ivory Coast, causing a public health crisis that affected 100,000 people. Again, many more examples I could give you there, but it would just depress you too much. It is self-evident that there are plenty of companies only paying lip service to the environment. So when you reflect on the motion, just think about this. How many is too many? In society, companies hold a lot of power influence, a lot of financial power. I'm sure you've all heard the statistic that of the 100 largest economies in the world, 51 are companies and not countries. Sometimes it's debated whether it's a bit more or less than that, but it's something like that. They don't just have a lot of financial power, they have a lot of power over natural resources, a lot of political power as well. Now, when you look at the huge challenges global society faces in the next couple of decades, climate change running out of control, when you look at the biodiversity loss, the fact that we're in the greatest species extinction ever, you really look at the fact that then we're in the facing that climate change, where a report this week has said that 100 million people are forecast to die by 2030 because of climate change. Around 5 to 6 million people a year. That's the equivalent of a 9/11 every 5 hours. And yet, most fossil fuel companies are still determined to keep us hooked in the same old, failed, broken energy system of the last century. Again, you look at... Have I got 1 minute? Right, thank you. I didn't know whether that was just resting there or whether... Okay. When you look at biodiversity loss and the collapse of ecosystem services, the reality is the vast majority of retailers and consumer product companies don't know where their products come from. They can't tell you if they're having a negative impact on the environment. Most of them don't even know. And given this alarming context, how many companies not caring about the environment is too many? I would say you could say even just one company not paying close attention is too many, but I'm afraid it's the majority. The UN estimates something like 5,000 companies are now producing corporate social responsibility reports. We could have a nice little debate whether that actually means anything or not, but let's assume for a minute it does. 5,000 sounds like a lot. Until I remind you again, there's not 5,000 companies in the world, there's 61,000 transnationals, and then millions of other companies on top. In what other realm of life would we consider 8% actually good behaviour? Would we consider that an advance? If you had 8% of car drivers wearing their seatbelts, Would we say that's enough? No, we'd say too many are not wearing their seatbelts. So ladies and gentlemen, you will hear many nice examples and stories tonight about companies doing things, good things. Interface, Shepherd Neame, I'm sure. And it's always good to hear those. And nothing I'm saying is taking away from that. I just ask you to do the number crunching. How many is too many that aren't doing the thing that the good companies are doing? I urge you to support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now to open the case for the opposition, we have Heather Hancock, who's a partner at Deloitte and Managing Director of Brand and Communication. Heather, thank you.
Mr. President, thank you very much. And first of all, I'd like to congratulate the distinguished proposer of this motion for being brave enough to finish on a number crunching argument for a firm of accountants. Now, perhaps 5 years ago, I might have found it a little difficult to argue against this motion. But I believe what's happened in the last 5 years has seen a fundamental shift in the belief that business has and the ownership that business has taken of the green agenda. In fact, I'm a bit surprised that the green movement is still a little bit anchored, its feet in concrete, about this move. Business is taking sustainability seriously. It's doing it, though, as a core business issue. It's doing it in a way that's integrated into the way it thinks about its business. It's holistic. It means that green doesn't sit in a parallel silo, special treatment, special nature, special marketing campaign. So perhaps the green movement is looking in the wrong place for the evidence that business attitudes and performance and behaviour really is changing. And one of the things that's given me particular confidence that we're no longer so comprehensively in an era of greenwash is that sustainability is now no longer a peripheral subject owned by somebody with a special title of corporate responsibility. If that had been the case, it would have felt the swish of the CFO's sword in the face of 5 years of recession. But CEOs and CFOs are now owning this agenda in their businesses. The business case isn't just understood, it's accepted as a no-brainer. Doesn't matter which dimension of business you look at, there's a compelling reason to integrate the environmental and sustainability case into the way in which you think about your products, your production system, the way you finance them, the way you account for them, the expectations of your consumers. Ownership of this has shifted to those two individuals who really do set the tone in business. The CEO, the ultimate boss, and the money man, or woman. Now, I do think there's a challenge for the environmental movement in this, because I think what we hear very often in the contributions from the green side of the argument is that they don't just want the right things doing, and they don't just want the right impact from it, they actually want evangelism. And it sometimes feels like you've got to volunteer to sit on the naughty step, preferably outside, preferably where lots of people can see you, and really atone for the emissions of the past before you're allowed and included in having really fully embraced this agenda. And that doesn't really suit necessarily the way a lot of business these days performs, progresses, and chooses to behave. And when the goal really has to be about mainstreaming the green agenda, how else are we ever going to really attain the environmental responsibility that we're looking for across the whole world? It has to be embedded in the way that business thinks and performs at its core. So I would urge you to look at the impact rather than the emotion that sits behind this argument. And I don't for one moment pretend that the progress I'm talking about in business is because everybody suddenly got religion. They didn't. And I don't care whether they suddenly got religion, actually. I don't mind that. I'm just happy that the facts and the outcomes of the many different influences that have led to the shift are all moving in one consistent direction. And those are facts and outcomes around the external environment, around the louder voice of so many different stakeholders, about consumer expectations, the expectations of a workforce, of public focus and attention. Let's just take one of those for starters. Consumer demand, the demand of new generations, new populations. We did some research for Davos this year, and we asked 1,000 millennials, that's people who maybe in a younger generation, but they're already in the workforce, so they're probably in their early 20s, rising to 27, 28 years old. We asked them about their expectations of business. And interestingly, they said that they believe that business had the greatest potential to effect positive societal change. More potential than government, more potential than NGOs. They were putting their trust in business. It's such a vote of confidence in the direction that business is taking, and it's not done out of naivety. These are people who are intelligent, informed people. They think very carefully about the world. They're already choosing employers and jobs. They are capable of making that informed judgment. And in that same survey, we discovered that 50% of these millennials believe that the purpose of business in their experience and their expectation was innovation and social development. So these are some of the people we're talking about who are making decisions and influencing consumer behaviour, employer behaviour, and the direction that business is taking. Let's look at another driver, cost pressure. Now, you would have to have been living under a stone not to have noticed in the last few years there's been ever such a bit of cost pressure on business. And that has been incredibly valuable in mainstreaming the green agenda into the way business thinks at its core. You may know in Deloitte we produce a quarterly CFO survey, very influential survey, barometer of how CFOs are thinking and feeling about the challenges facing them. And earlier this year in one of our quarterly surveys, we specifically asked CFOs about sustainability. 49% of the CFOs who respond in this survey said they saw a significant link between sustainability performance and financial performance in their businesses. 2/3 said that they were always or frequently involved in driving execution of sustainability strategies into their organisations. Half of them said that involvement decreased in the last 12 months. 2/3 said they expected it to increase again in the next 12 and 24 months. That's not lip service. CFOs tend not to do lip service. And a big part of that general cost pressure has, of course, been the pressure on front-end costs, or particularly on resources, energy prices, etc. I don't see a problem in that either. If it drives companies like Eurostar to launch something like their Tread Lightly programme, which they did in 2007, good. It's driven Eurostar to think about many dimensions of their business operation. It has also released £500,000 of operating expenditure cost savings in the course of every year. We know that M&S is a poster child for this, but it can't be unimportant that by being a poster child, they've shone a light on £70 million a year of savings they're making through pursuing Plan A.
If they're doing it for business reasons rather than environmental reasons, isn't that exactly what lip service is? It's not for a green agenda, it's for a financial agenda.
Thank you, Evangelist. You just really helpfully made my point. So I don't understand the point, because really I don't understand why delivering green benefits because of a focus on cost means lip service. I think that's such a naive understanding of what business might be about. I thought the green movement wanted the environment to feature on the bottom line, or do you always want it to be in a separate sustainability report? You're going to have to make your minds up about this. Businesses of all sizes are pursuing the long-term strategic and competitive advantage that sustainability can bring. And good on them. As I say, I don't mind whether they've got the religion. I mind that the impacts and outcomes that are being delivered are going to deliver for them. This is what successful sustainability strategies in business now look like. How much time have I got? Right, excellent, thank you. I'd like to finish with a couple of final points. First of all, I'd like to remind you that businesses are actually run by human beings. And there's also something in this debate which suggests that those of us with a social conscience and environmental conscience, or who just have some respect for the world that we inhabit, somehow leave those concerns at the office door, the factory plant door, when we walk in through the morning. Of course we don't. We continue to make rational, long-term, thoughtful decisions about the direction of our business, which reflect the beliefs that we see around us in society the way we think about the world, in the way that we go about it. We're taking it seriously. I believe that's evidenced again by the extent of governance and assurance activity that's happening across the business agenda at board level. Organisations which have the highest level of sustainability governance were shown last year in an LBS survey to outperform on share performance their peer group. Surely a strong emphasis on sustainability governance is something to be welcomed. And our own analysis shows the extent of that. 305 of the FTSE 350 now publish sustainability reports. We've heard that slightly mocked, but personally, I can't see a board spending time, energy, and attracting public attention if they don't really care about these sort of things. I see it in our own business, I see it in the business of many of our clients. So to close, I really urge this House to oppose the motion. I'd like you to evidence that you're sophisticated, experienced, and thoughtful people who understand the way in which business makes decisions and pursues long-term growth and sustainability by embedding the green agenda in the way we look at our whole business operations, not by putting it up as some kind of marketing or brand campaign to the side and simply hoping that greenwash will continue to work. The question for this House isn't, are too many companies paying lip service to the green agenda? But are we giving businesses enough credit for the shift they're making to make sustainability core business practice? Thank you.
Thank you very much. To continue the case for the proposition, we have Ramon Arratia, who is European Sustainability Director for Interface Floor, a member of the carpet industry. Please go ahead.
Good evening. Thank you to the union and thank you to Deloitte for this opportunity to defend this point of view. I come from the carpet industry, very sexy sector. Our company invented this idea of cutting the carpet into 50 by 50 tiles, and then we became a multi-billion-dollar business. And in 1994, our CEO somehow had an epiphany, and he said, we're going to have Mission Zero. Yoo-hoo, yeah, Mission Zero, let's go for it. They were Americans. This is how they set up targets in the US. Now, we think that in Europe, this won't work. And how do we set up targets in Europe? How do companies and politicians set up targets in Europe? They would say, what is technically feasible? 20%? Let's go for 15. To ensure that we achieve it. Now, but the wrong question is, what is technically feasible? Because what is technically feasible with what you know today? What is technically feasible with what the geeks in the organization know today? And all these technical people, they want to be the cleverest people, they want to know everything, they want to have all the answers. But not all the clever people in the world work for you. So you miss a big, big access to radical innovation. Thank you, Heather, for raising the issue of evangelist. I agree with you. This is not about evangelism. This is not about just it has to be about the business case. Yet, what is the business case for an oil company not to do oil? What is the business case of an electricity company today not to produce more electricity? The system doesn't work, and these companies cannot break the systems. We are trapped in the status quo. We're trapped in the status quo of these big companies that they have a market to defend. How many people work on sustainability, on corporate sustainability here? We are all milking the same cow. We're all milking the same cow of the corporates that they have to defend the status quo. Which company will be radical enough to change their products and services and so that they become more sustainable? You won't touch that. You want to defend your market. We need disruptors. We need the same examples as Apple did with the music industry, what Apple did with the newspapers industry. We need some sectors to cannibalize other sectors, and we need proper legislation for that. We need old school legislation. I'm going to give you an example on old school legislation. What is the biggest impact of a car? Is the fuel that you use for using the car. You can measure that in grams of CO2 per kilometer. Then that becomes the magic metric. Don't tell me that a car company has sustainability in a holistic, integrated way, and the board has meetings about sustainability. Just cut the fluff and tell me just one single thing. Grams of CO2 per kilometer. This is how you are sustainable. It's product sustainability, not corporate sustainability. Thank goodness we don't live in a democracy. We live in a bureaucracy. We live in a technocracy. And some guys from Brussels, those ugly guys, French and Belgian and God knows where, from Brussels, they came up with this idea, a top-down, old-school target for the car industry, grams of CO2 per kilometer, 95 grams of CO2 per kilometer in 2020. If you don't achieve that, you pay a fine. Then they had another really good idea. You're going to report that metric into every single promotional material. So in every single car advertising, if you go to any car dealer across Europe, you have the magic metric and you see the magic metric. And that creates consumer awareness. Today, even my mom knows that 200 grams of CO2 is too much and 99 is quite all right. And the third thing is that that legislation allowed us, national legislation showed that when you buy a car in the UK, you pay more tax for higher carbon tax, for higher carbon cars, and less tax for lower carbon tax. The same within the congestion charge in London, etc., etc. So this concept of the magic metric has enabled a huge amount of innovation. Today, the car companies are doing lots around sustainability. Is that paying lip service or is not? This is up to you to judge. But they have been forced by old school legislation coming from ugly Brussels. And if these things don't happen, companies don't react. Thank you, Heather, for raising the issue of integration, of holistic. In how many CSR reports and CEOs' speeches we have heard, sustainability is part of our DNA in our company. Free claim, easy claim. How would you rebate that? Now, sustainability is really core when you change your product, when you radically change your product. Is your product low carbon? Is your product zero waste? It should. It depends on whether that product is going to have maybe a tax advantage or not. I'll give you an example. We have carpet that produce 20 kilograms of CO2 and carpet that produce 5 kilograms of CO2. Now, both carpet pay the same tax, so we haven't got any incentive to sell more of the low carbon. We do what we can, but the system doesn't help us. If you want companies to move, you need to get the system to help into that. Now, we need to move from all these corporate sustainability fluff and reports and nice speeches from CEOs and corporate branding. We need to move towards product sustainability, cutting the fluff and showing the magic metrics. I'll give you another example. You imagine that you're a company producing ice creams and you say, I'm going to have a plan A or sustainability living plan, and you get a lot of credit for that. And you still sell bloody ice creams. Taking palm oil from Indonesia, transporting, it's all 100% certified, looks so good. Then you transport all this palm oil, you make ice creams, and you sell this ice cream to people like me who don't want ice creams, but they catch us on the most vulnerable time of the day with their bloody machines in the tube, and you have to eat the ice cream because you feel vulnerable, you stress, anxiety. Now, is this really radically redesigning their business model, or is this having a nice corporate strategy and selling the same stuff, maintaining the same market? How am I doing? Time. Thank you. Look at the car companies. We need disruptors. Which of the current status quo protecting car companies disrupted and started to do a renting service? Zipcar. Someone who wasn't in the status quo, someone who had nothing to lose. All the disruption always comes from people with nothing to lose. Why would you risk and do something if you have a lot to lose? So that's why I really believe that companies are paying a lip service to sustainability, because most companies, they defend the status quo. They defend their core market. Now, I have faith still in companies, because some companies can enter and cannibalize the market of other people. And I'll give you an example from ours. We came up with a way to install carpet without glue. Now we are entering the glue market by cannibalizing that market. So if you apply that, you could have companies like insulation companies cannibalizing the electricity companies. This is happening, and it's happening for financial reasons, and it's happening for commercial reasons, but this does not happen very often. And most of the sustainability strategies of the companies start by having some fluffy targets that then they commit to report every year. They have to audit those targets, but they are on the wrong target. So my main 2 points I wanted to raise is that this disruption, this radical progress in sustainability comes either from old school legislation, so government had to lead on that, or from cannibalizing to other markets. I really believe that not many companies are really taking sustainability seriously today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker for the opposition is Jonathan Neame, Chief Executive of Shepherd Neame, which is a member of the brewing and pub industry. Please.
Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, I'm very grateful for Ramon for introducing the subject of sustainability, because as the owner and operator of the oldest continuous manufacturing site in the country that's been going since 1507, I think we know a little bit about sustainability. We're on the same site, we've been adapting to change, and sustainability does not mean sticking in the status quo. It means continuously adapting to what consumers want today and what they want tomorrow. Indeed, with our pubs, for example, I've spent most of the last 10 years taking out all those floor tiles that I put in the 70s and 80s. Probably not from your company, Ramon. I couldn't resist that, but it was worth it. I'm also very grateful to the previous speaker, Heather, against the motion, for saying that the green agenda is, of course, central to the business agenda and is extremely good for business. It's good for shareholders, it's good for consumers, it's good for employees, and of course it's good for the environment. It's absolutely core. It's not a fashion industry. It's genuine, it's not cynical. And this feels like a debate that should have taken place 10 years ago. It feels like we're discussing the suffragette motion 10 years after women were given the vote. Why? Because, as Heather said, we're all part of the same human race, and we're all worried about the 21st century core challenge. Rising population, energy deficiencies and energy needs, and feeding the world. But you know, we are also in a democratic capitalist society and a democratic capitalist world, whether people like it or not. Money makes the world go round. And what spends money is the consumer. So all good businesses are looking to consumer needs the whole time. And what consumers want every day, in every market, at all times, is better products at a lower cost for better value. And if there's an environmental benefit as well, that ticks the ethical box in the mind of the consumer. Let me give you some examples from my industry. This is examples from the brewing industry. In contravention to the first speaker in favor of the motion, this is the global brewing industry, of which there are thousands and thousands of companies. Just in the last 20 years alone, the global brewing industry has reduced carbon emissions by 60%. They've reduced water consumption from an average of 9 pints of water per pint of beer produced, and 42% in the last 10 years alone. The industry is at near zero waste to landfill. 90% of all of our raw material is recycled or recovered, and we are leaders in the lightweighting of packaging and glass. Let us consider what my company has done, which should have been cited in one of the examples, not just the top 30. Because we go way over and above what our legal requirement is, which may be defined as lip service. Indeed, on many occasions, we go over and beyond what the consumer wants. We've put technology in called PDX technology, steam injection technology, which not only delivers a product improvement, it removes caramelization, burnt toffee flavors that you tend to get in beers that you find in Cambridge and around. But you also get a 45% reduction in the energy usage in that part of the process. In my company's case, we've increased our production by 20% in the last 5 years, but reduced our megajoules by 33%, reduced our kilowatt hours by 25%, and reduced our water consumption by 22%. We're doing all kinds of things like using cooking fat from our pubs, go back into the vehicles so that we can drive them and deliver. And I could go on and bore you for hours, but you only allowed me 10 minutes, which I think is extremely unfair. But just give you another example. There is legislative-driven refrigeration needs to move back to ammonia. That's good for the environment. It protects the ozone layer, removes away from R22 gases. What we do, refrigeration creates heat as a byproduct. We take that heat, we then run it through plate heat exchangers, and we heat all of our offices and all of the brewery. For it, that saves us £75,000 a year. These are good initiatives because they reduce cost and they benefit the environment. If the costs are lower and there's a product benefit too, the consumer is the winner. However, one thing we don't do is we don't talk about it a lot, because that part of our environmental success is not a core part of our communication. It is for some companies. Every sector will have a company that is making that a core part of their communication, and in this part of the world there's a brewery called Adnams, of which that is the central part of their communication, and they are very good at it. But in my world, we choose other characteristics of meeting the consumer demand, quality, service, etc., as core to our communication. And occasionally a few cheeky ads on Spitfire, but that's another story. Could we do more? Of course we could do more. We can make our pubs more energy efficient. We can use our spent grain, our byproduct. We can freeze dry it. We can burn it. We can turn it into energy. We can capture the carbon, re-liquefy it, use it in the process. Again, I could go on, but the difficulty is with those things is that all of those technologies at the moment do not meet my cost of capital. If they don't meet my cost of capital, it means I'm investing in a loss-making venture. It means that my overall product to my consumer will be getting more and more expensive. If I do that, it means I have shareholders on my back, and in a family business, when you're related to all of your shareholders, that's a pretty unpleasant event, I can tell you. So could the government push us further? Well, of course they could. They can subsidize new technologies. They can set higher taxes. They can set emission targets. They do all of these things. But in my experience, a lot of government intervention either creates distortions in the market or is too hasty or has unexpected consequences. Let me give you some examples. Take wind energy, for example. All of the early investments in wind energy, or many of them, you have gear slippage in wind turbines. If you take the fact that many governments in the world are pulling back from renewables, look at the renewables equity market at the moment, which is panned. And therefore there's very little capital coming from the capital markets to go into and fund what is a very worthwhile thing. Take biofuel. I think it's a great idea to grow crops and then to burn it, and it's all very environmental. It protects the planet, and it's very good in a number of different ways. But what it does do is take very good agricultural land out of food production, which means that the rest of the land is having to produce more food, and it pushes the cost of food up, which means that ultimately the consumer pays more, and that's not good for the planet where the population is rising so fast. This year alone, because of the drought in the US, the cost of cereals has gone through the roof. The margin between feed cereal and cereal for bioethanol has evaporated. Therefore, there's no incentive for the farmers to go grow good grain that goes back into the food chain, which means that we have huge bow wave of inflation coming through on all cereal-related products in 2013-14. That is very bad for the economy. It's also bad for feeding people. There are good things that the government can do. They can set and evolve and drive the transparency of environmental disclosure, whether it's to do with houses, with energy performance certificates, or indeed on food packaging. I can see an evolution where gradually producers will have to put exactly what their environmental footprint is on the label of their products. I think that's a good thing. We're not there yet. It needs a lot of debate, but we will get there, and those companies that are doing well will be the ones that have got the right transparency and disclosure, because that motivates consumers too. Now, of course, in every sector, indeed in every walk of life, there are good companies and there are bad companies. But in my experience, those companies that are not putting the green agenda at the core part of their activity are clearly not looking at their cost base, and they are probably also failing on all other aspects of consumer or product delivery, whether it's product quality, service, or price. As a consequence, sooner or later, they will not have a business. They will be losing money, losing market share, and go out of business. Therefore, they are not sustainable. So what companies like mine are looking for, and what companies, I think, across all industry are looking for, is the win-win. Something that is reducing cost and saving the environment. Now, let me take the Plan A. I'm glad you referenced it. The Marks & Spencer's Plan A. Of course, they are leading in terms of the recycling of plastic product. This is great to reduce the number of polymers used for plastic that are only able to be recycled. But you know what? That is also stimulating other companies, including my own, to look at their own packaging waste. You then get the secondary effects, like in Kent and in other county councils, where they are now changing the mindset of waste recovery. And rather than seeing domestic waste recovery as being a £70 million cost to their organisation, they now see that as a future resource, a £500 million potential turnover for using the energy from plastic packaging to convert it into future energy. Tomorrow's future market is going to be digging up the landfill sites that we filled in the last 50 years or so, getting that energy out and burning it and using it in a productive way. One man's trash is another man's treasure. And on that note, I'm very happy to oppose the motion.
Thank you very much. Now is your time, members of the audience, to have your voice heard on the motion. What we'll do is we'll do a few rounds, as I said, of floor speeches, where if you raise your hand to speak for 1 minute in proposition, then opposition, then abstention. If you are chosen to speak, please wait for a microphone to reach you. Even if you have a very powerful voice, which you can project very well, if you don't speak into a microphone, it won't go into the recording, and it will not be saved for posterity. So please do wait for a microphone once I call on you. And if you're a student, it would be great if you could say your name and college when you stand up. If you are not a student, it would be great if you could say your name before you begin your speech. So with that, are there any points in proposition of the motion? Again, the motion is this House believes too many companies are only paying lip service to the green agenda. Would you like to speak in proposition? If someone could bring you a microphone, please.
My name's Andrew Guy. I am from PGC. It seems to me that the one issue that hasn't come up is that we are reliant as a business community and as a global population on oil, coal and other forms of carbon. Every business investment decision that is made
in favour of deriving energy from a carbon source is an investment decision that should be challenged. Business has a huge voice and huge influence, and it is my contention that if business is not pressurising the authorities, whether they be government or otherwise, public opinion, to start investing in sources of energy that are not using carbon, then the business community is failing the planet and the people that live in it. That is important and hasn't been touched on here. Everything else is rearranging the deck chairs on the ship as it sinks. There is only a finite amount of carbon in this planet that can be used as an energy source until we start switching our allegiances and our minds from carbon to renewable sources, or at least carbon neutral sources. We are destined to fail in our efforts to sustain our businesses and our lives. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Before we take a point in opposition of the motion, would anyone in opposition like to respond to that point? In that case, we'll continue on to a point in opposition. Let me just remind you, you need not be an expert on the subject. If you have any thoughts you want to share, you don't need to be an expert in the corporate industry or in sustainable energy. If you have something you'd like to contribute, please do feel free. All views are here welcome. So is there a point in opposition of the motion? I see someone up there. Can we get a microphone to him?
My name is Javier Yapendara, Panamanian student at Jesus College. Mr. Ramon Arratia was saying that companies don't get enough incentives through taxes when he made that comparison. Now I want to ask this house, who are the real ones to blame? Don't you think that real incentives should come from consumers, from their preferences? And second, aren't the consumers, I mean the public at large, the ones who really don't care about the green agenda? I believe this house needs to redirect the blame and stop using companies as a scapegoat. Because at the end of the day, all companies do is offer goods and services while employing people. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I believe we have a short response from the proposition. If you could stand.
It's the system, not blaming consumers or the companies. I would like, when I go to the supermarket, I wouldn't like to take a decision on how much carbon has the toothpaste, how much carbon has the potatoes. I don't have time. And what I want is a system that the low performing products are not there. And this is not happening. And I think, we want, as consumers, we want that to be outsourced to the government. We want this to be outsourced to business. Because we are already outsourcing them to come up with services. We are outsourcing them, many other decisions. So when we go to the supermarket, we don't want to think about that. We just want to enjoy the stuff. But then we want them to do this for us, and we would vote for these things to happen.
Thank you very much. We're going to skip the speeches in abstention and go back now to a speech in proposition of the motion. Is there a 1-minute floor speech in proposition of the motion? Yes, please.
Thank you, Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen. I think Mr. Bennett made a very good point when he analysed the wording of the motion and referred to the fact that we're talking about whether there are too many companies paying lip service. We've heard examples of individual companies, but the fact remains that there are still many companies who do not make any attempts to recognise or conform to the green agenda. I have myself to share an interest, in the way I've worked for several years in the renewable energy business, developing from startup a business which generates electricity from food waste. And I can tell you from bitter experience that there are many examples of businesses. Indeed, one of the businesses that has been quoted tonight as an example of the best example of businesses that are working to a green agenda, which has professed a desire to be involved in the green sector, to contribute food waste for the generation of green electricity, but would only do so where the cost of providing such food waste was less than that of sending food waste to landfill, where that particular business would not incur the cost of source segregating food waste for the provision of electricity.
If you could please bring your speech to a close, I'm sorry. It's just to be 1 minute.
Okay, I do apologise. Okay, the examples that I've quoted then, for me, are examples of businesses that are merely paying lip service, who are professing to pursue a green agenda when they perceive a marketing advantage, but without any real commitment. And therefore, I support the motion.
Thank you very much. Is there a brief response from the opposition side?
Yes, I would just like to respond to that.
I don't think you have your microphones.
I don't, because I'll give it to the next speaker.
I think we have to distinguish between the substance of people actually investing for the green agenda, and I would put my companies in that case, and the marketing of it. There are people that will market and also do it. There were people that are market, but it's greenwashing, and there were people that will do it, but don't market. We're in the latter, and I think it's important to understand that distinction. But for my money, most companies that are worth their salt look at the cost of the benefit of reducing costs the whole time, and one of the key costs in any business is the cost of energy, and that is something that we're all looking to reduce. Thank you.
Thank you. And is there a 1-minute speech in opposition of the motion? Yes, please.
Thank you. My name is Guy Battle. Two issues here, I think, are worth raising, Mr. President. The first is that business likes making money. I mean, it is sort of a no-brainer to some extent. Sustainability now is in a place where there is a very clear business case. We've heard it tonight from the opposition speakers that you need to save money relating to operational efficiencies. You need to make money because the market's shifting. It is beggars belief to me that any business would not embrace sustainability as a core business issue. And it is obvious to me that all businesses are doing this. There's also a presumption, I think, from the other side of the floor that somehow people running businesses are bad people. I mean, I find this really somewhat insulting, that people go to work, business people go to work, and they somehow want to pollute the environment. They want to make things a lot worse, but they've got children, they've got grandchildren, all these things. And actually, they all share the same ambition, and now I think it's very clear to me they are also making changes. Now, it's not easy to make those changes, but I would argue that the examples that the opposite side used, such as BP, are outliers at this point, and the vast majority of businesses are working with sustainability as a core business issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I believe we have a brief response from the proposition.
Thank you. Actually, I was at pains tonight to not get into the blame game. I didn't do that at all. I didn't actually question the motivation of people running companies as to why they're involved in the sustainability agenda, despite a very interesting response from Heather that suggested I did. Actually, if you ask me about the reasons this happened, I would say it's absolutely because of the system. We currently have a global economic system that absolutely fails to really reward companies to move in the right way. And not for a minute did I suggest that the people in companies are kind of evil or anything like that. I think the system is absolutely rigged so that we don't protect the environment. And that's what's got to change. We have, like the point made earlier about as consumers, we can't, as consumers, worry about these issues on every single purchase we make. And we don't do that with other things in life. You don't go into a toy shop and have to work out for yourself which toys are safe and which are dangerous by looking at a label. You can buy any toy safe with the knowledge that it's been produced to minimum health and safety standards so it doesn't kill your child. All I want is a global system where you can buy any product safe with the knowledge it doesn't destroy the environment. And I want companies to get behind the kind of regulatory frameworks that are needed to do that. But look at the motion here tonight. Look at the text of the motion. And please don't bring prejudices to this debate about what we might think or not think. It's a simple number crunching exercise. How many companies do you really think are deeply moving on the green agenda? How many are paying lip service? If you think it's too many paying lip service, I urge you to support the motion.
Thank you very much. And with that, we'll return to the regular speeches. To close the debate for the proposition, we have Adam Booth, who's a PhD student in environmental engineering at Cambridge and a prominent student campaigner and political activist. Adam, please go ahead.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, as has been suggested, I'd like to speak with two hats on tonight. One is as a PhD student in environmental engineering with expertise in this field. But the other, and more important, is as a political activist, and more importantly, as a socialist. Because what I will argue this evening, as has been already highlighted, is that this is not a problem simply of lip service from certain companies or of moral decisions made by individuals. This is a systematic problem whereby big businesses operating within a free market in pursuit of profit are forced to drive down costs at all cost. And that means basically destroying the environment. Capitalism, in other words, cannot solve the ecological crisis that faces us. Now, I understand that asking a room full of big business representatives to vote on the motion on this behalf is like asking a room full of turkeys to vote for Christmas. But the reality is, if we don't transform society, then it's going to be much more than us in this room who suffers. It's going to be future generations. In the words of Rosa Luxemburg, I believe that the options facing us are socialism or barbarism. Now, Karl Marx once said, "Mankind always sets itself only such tasks as it can solve, since, looking at the matter more closely, we always find that the task itself arises only when the material conditions necessary for its solution already exist, or at least are in the process of formation." This is exactly true for the environmental crisis we find ourselves in now. For the vast majority of our time as a species, we've had a struggle against nature, a struggle to survive. But through the development of science and technology, we've become masters over nature, increasingly able to manipulate it to our own advantage. Through this development of production and technique, we have harnessed the power of the electron and the atom. We've cured crippling diseases and unraveled our own genetic code. In the words of Marx, we have accomplished wonders far surpassing Egyptian pyramids, Roman aqueducts, and Gothic cathedrals. But we've also created new struggles, struggles not between man and nature, but between man and man. As Marx says, all hitherto written history is the history of class struggle, freeman and slave, lord and serf, oppressor and oppressed. Today we talk about the 1% and the 99% and the vital question of who pays for this crisis. The fact is, sorry, not at the moment. I'm in full flow. The fact is, we have not resolved the struggle between us and nature. We've realized that we are not simply masters of nature, but rather that we live on a planet that not only do we take from it, but we give back to it in terms of waste and pollution. To go back to what Marx said, mankind always sets itself only such tasks as it can solve. The fact is we've made great advances as a species. We've developed science and technology. We can manipulate our surroundings to the highest degree imaginable. We can produce tremendous amounts of wealth. But the problem is that these advances could only be used to solve the problem. Sorry. The fact is, in the current system, where production is for profit, an anarchic system where basically our futures are handed to the gods of competition, in this, future generations are sacrificed. Rather than using this great amount of productive capacity and societal knowledge at our disposal, instead of using this to solve the problems of the environmental crisis, the companies are only pursuing profit. For example, under capitalism, billions are spent so that oil companies can drill to unfathomable depths. Billions more are spent on the military equipment used to invade countries in order to extract this oil. And billions more are used to pipe this oil back across the world. Yes, please.
Might you bring up the environmental record over the past 100 years of any communist country?
I very much agree. Stalinism has not worked, but that's not why I'm advocating at all. Now, as has been pointed out, these same oil companies are now trying to extract oil from the Arctic ice, which is melting due to their very own activity. To paraphrase Lenin, climate change is terrible, terribly profitable. The fact, I'll give another example closer to my own research. Since 2004, the number of households in fuel poverty has increased from 1.2 million to 4.0 million, households that cannot afford to heat their homes adequately. At the same time, we have 27,000 people per year dying due to not being able to heat their homes. But what do we see? We see British Gas and their owners, Centrica, announcing record profits of 345 million, a rise of 23%. What do politicians offer us in the coalition government? The Green Deal, an attempt to try and get private finance into the insulation of homes. But why should this even be necessary? The government already spends £2 billion a year on the winter fuel pavement, which is effectively a subsidy to these very same energy companies and the cowboy construction companies who are allowed to build to low standards in the construction sector, and the energy companies that get profits, but meanwhile these old people are dying in their homes. Why aren't we taking these energy companies into national ownership, I've already had 2 points, thank you very much. Why aren't we taking these construction companies, these energy companies into public ownership and running them in the interests of these people who are currently dying? As I've said, the problems that the problem facing us, we already have the technology to solve it. The fact is that at the moment, this technology is used to accumulate wealth for a few private individuals, rather than being put to the good use of society. In the early 20th century, science fiction writers would dreamt of a world where, due to automation, we could lie back and enjoy the fruits of the labor of the machines that we'd invented. But under capitalism, we're not liberated by technology, but enslaved by us. Far from providing an impetus to the development of science, competition has become an immense technological barrier. Sorry, I've already taken many points. One only has to look at the ridiculous situation of Apple and Samsung suing each other over rounded corners of phones or double tapping your screen to realize what an incredible barrier this supposed impetus of competition has become. And let's remember that actually, really, implicitly, planning of production is actually recognized as being far more efficient. Within all your firms, you don't just leave it up to the market to decide how things run. Things are planned. From the farms and the factories to the shops and the supermarkets, there is a plan of how to produce and how to distribute. What is lacking is a plan between companies on how to use this immense productive capacity. Let's also remember that when humanity has been faced with huge crises, world wars, putting a man in space, things like this, these sort of huge situations, what did we do? Did we leave it up to the free market? Of course not. Companies were told what to produce, and vast sectors of the economy were put under a plan of production. Climate change is far more serious than any world war or the Cold War and putting a man in space. Capitalism offers no solution to climate change. The market solutions that we're presented with, at best, we have the EU emissions trading scheme, which, for those who know, is currently basically doing nothing. Okay? It's completely collapsed, mainly because of the result of lobbying of big business, who've reduced the areas that the ETS applies to, but also because they allowed far too many credits into the system, and the price of carbon has slumped. As the New Scientist correctly commented, if we cannot trust financiers with something as apparently straightforward as the housing market, why should we imagine they can triumph at controlling global pollution? A carbon tax is the other option put forward, but it's no better. It's a regressive tax that's going to hit the poorest hardest. As I've said, those who are already finding it difficult to heat their homes. And on an international level, we see treaties like Copenhagen, but where have they got to? All we end up with is protectionism, no solutions, no agreements at all. Now, I'd like to end by saying that all we need to do is look across to the Mediterranean to see, in two ways, our own future. On the one respect, we see our own future in terms of a climate, a very warm climate, where we can perhaps grow olives and wine, and for a lot of people this might seem like a very nice prospect. You don't need to worry about buying that Greek island that's very cheap at the moment. You can get Cretian weather in Brighton. But on the other respect, Greece and Spain and countries like this show us our own future in the respect of permanent austerity and deep recession, of 25% unemployment or 50% amongst the youth. This is the future facing us here in Britain. As I said, the solutions to our own problems already exist. The embryo of a new society has already grown within the womb of the old. All of these crises, wars, environmental disasters, what we're seeing today are the birth pangs of a new society trying to be born. It's our job to act as the midwives of history, to help this new society to be born, and to make this birth as peaceful as possible. Ladies and gentlemen, I urge you to vote for this motion. But I urge you not just to vote, but to leave this room and embark on a project to transform society, for the good of the planet, for the good of the current generation, and for the good of future generations to come. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Chair of the Energy and Climate Change Committee. If you'd like to go ahead, you have 10 minutes.
Mr. President, thank you very much for your kind introduction, and also a graduate of Emmanuel College. I would like to begin by congratulating Adam, who wound up for the proposition with such vigor and passion. Had he been speaking to a debate about the future of capitalism, this would have been a relevant speech. I struggled, however, to find much in it which actually related to the motion which we're debating. I apologize for the unintended discourtesy to the proposer, Craig, by my unfortunately getting on the wrong train at Liverpool Street while I was on the phone, and hence my late arrival. But he and I think, probably more often find each other on the same side in these debates, and certainly his response to one of the interventions on this side, I thought showed actually he probably made an extremely eloquent and persuasive speech in favour of the motion, and I regretted not being here to listen to it. I did, however, have the benefit of hearing my honourable friends on this side, Heather and Jonathan, who spoke so ably. They've left me very little to say, really, but I'll try and pick up one or two of the arguments as we go through. I particularly welcome the fact that Heather made the point that the business often may be acting sustainably for economic reasons, but what is wrong with that? Why should we not be proud of the fact that sometimes economic drivers are making us do the right thing environmentally as well? It's one of the great opportunities for Britain to be a pioneer in so many fields. Jonathan, I slightly regretted his slur on some of the East Anglian brewers. He's a proprietor of a very fine brewer in Kent, and I'm a regular consumer of his products when in that part of the world, but about 45 years ago I became a great admirer of some of our brewers around here as well. The honourable gentleman who spoke from the carpet industry, I learned quite a lot about that. I would just like to respond on the point about cars. It is, of course, true that engine standards have been driven more and more rigorously by EU regulations. And I welcome that myself. I think the industry has responded well. And we've seen progressively more fuel-efficient vehicles introduced as a result of regulation. Maybe unusual for a Conservative to say I'm in favour of regulation, even more unusual to find a Conservative who's in favour of EU regulation, but on this matter I unashamedly own up to both. But I think he overlooks the fact that actually the industry has responded to this. And what we're seeing now are better, more comfortable, safer, actually sometimes faster, but much more fuel-efficient cars. And that is not just the result of EU regulations, it's the result of a tremendous amount of innovation by the industry. Billions, literally billions of pounds are poured into research by Mercedes and Audi and BMW and Jaguar and so on into making these vehicles do better things for less fuel consumption. And that's not the result of regulation, it's the result of an industry responding to what they see as an opportunity to act in a more sustainable way. Mr. President, I'd just like to deal with this motion, particularly in relation to climate change, which was the point, of course, Adam was addressing. And I do so from the perspective not only of a politician who's been campaigning for 2 decades to get climate change taken more seriously, but also someone in my post-front bench but pre-retirement phase. I'm in no rush to retire. I don't think there's going to be a vacancy in South Suffolk just yet. I do now serve on 3 boards, 2 as chairman, of companies involved in the energy and transport industries, all of whom offer their customers a low-carbon product or service. And 2 of those companies are at the cutting edge of technology for Britain, with research laboratories in this country developing low-carbon energy technologies which could be very substantially beneficial to our economy as well as to our environment. I accept, of course, at the outset, as Craig would have us believe, that there are still some companies which do pay lip service to the green agenda. They talk a good game, but they don't act one. As a matter of fact, I could name 1 or 2 politicians who come into that category as well. But this is not a partisan occasion, so far be it from me to cast any aspersions on former Prime Minister Blair. But I invite you to judge business by what it is actually doing. I remember 20 years ago when I was first given ministerial responsibility for climate change in the, I'm afraid now, rather unlamented John Major government. At that time, climate change was very much a minority subject. If you raised it at a dinner party, people thought you were some kind of freak. How incredibly that has changed in the 2 intervening decades. At that time, though, in the early 1990s, most of the business world was actually rather hostile to the climate change agenda. They saw it as some were in denial completely. Some saw it as a potential burden which would add costs to their businesses for no benefit. But in the last 15 years, those attitudes in business have been totally transformed. And there are many industries now that are heavily addressed at the cutting edge in addressing climate change and developing the solutions to it. And I don't think any industries now ignore the threat of climate change completely. There are many very large investors in low-carbon technology, not just the obvious ones like renewable energy or the insurance industry, which is in rather the front line of the defense against the consequences of climate change. There are the retailers who are looking at how they design their stores. Even people like McDonald's are looking at how they design the vehicles that they use to move their stuff around. There are trade bodies like the CBI, which was pretty skeptical 10 years ago, and now is absolutely at the forefront of addressing climate change issues. So I think there's been a transformation there. And of course it's been partly for self-interest. Of course it's partly because business can recognize the threats to its business model, as well as the opportunities that the low-carbon agenda offer. But I also think it's because business takes a longer-term view than most democratically elected politicians can do. We have, in a democracy, people who seldom look ahead more than 5 years. In fact, the long term in politics in the West is 3 years. Business, on the other hand, is looking at an investment cycle which may be 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. In the electricity generation industry, probably 40 years. And they have to look much further ahead. They will act also, in my view, having worked at a fairly senior level, both in politics and in business, business will act in a more rational way. Decision making is a more simple, straightforward process. It's about increasing sales, or market share, or improving productivity, or increasing profits. Politicians have to balance so many other factors as well, the views of their supporters, particularly of their activist supporters. I can let you into a secret. I actually intend to vote in favour of gay marriage, to the outrage of most of my voters in South Suffolk. We have to take these things into account, the views of lobby groups, the views of the media. It's harder to produce a rational response to a problem if you're in government than if you are in business, as the debate about Heathrow has recently illustrated. So it's no surprise to me that the country which perhaps worries less about democratic time cycles than any other, China, is one of the biggest investors in low-carbon technology. They have the biggest reforestation program in the world. They are piloting emissions trading systems in 5 provinces and 2 cities as we speak. They are the largest investor in renewable energy. They're the biggest producer of solar panels. That's not happening in the West. It's happening, rather improbably perhaps, in China, because the Chinese authorities are worried not about what happens in 2015 or even 2020, but in 2050 and 2060. And they know at that time any country whose economy is based on a high carbon model is going to be a country which has not only done the wrong thing economically, environmentally, but will also be at a considerable competitive disadvantage environmentally, because by that time it is almost certain, notwithstanding the failure so far of the EU emissions trading system, that we'll have a high carbon price. Look at the countries that are now getting into emissions trading, not just China, Korea, Australia, African countries, some of the individual states in the US on the east and west coasts. We will see either a carbon price driven by an international emissions trading system, or I think very high carbon taxes in all advanced countries in the world. And so those countries that want to be competitive will be countries that move to a low carbon model. And I hope very much that Britain and the European Union will be absolutely in the vanguard of that. There are many people in business, many businesses who would like to go much further than they currently do. There are some obstacles, consumer attitudes and their reluctance to pay even a penny extra in the pound for a greener product. Media attitudes, influential newspapers like the Daily Mail, whose editorial line is consistently hostile to the green agenda. There's also sometimes uncertainty about government policy. Nothing kills investment in green technology more quickly than a doubt about whether the present policies, whether they're regulatory or tax incentives or anything else, are likely to change. And we've seen too much of that under the last government, and we're seeing too much of that under this government, as my committee will keep saying. But despite all these constraints, I believe the evidence is now overwhelmingly clear. Had this motion been proposed in this chamber 10 years ago, the proposition would have been carried almost unanimously. Tonight, Mr. President, I hope very much that the people here will recognise and respect and even applaud the progress that business has made and vote against the motion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And before I let everyone go, first off, I just want to again welcome the students to the Union, and some of you welcome to Cambridge. It's great to have you here, and we hope you'll be returning quite often. The first 2 weeks of term, the Union is open to members and non-members, so if you'd like to see some of our debates, hear some of our speakers, it's a great opportunity to try out before you do join. Also, after the debate, we welcome you to join us in the bar. Myself and the committee members who are here, Joel, Alex, Joel, and some others. Okay, there's a Ben as well, I promise. We will be around in the bar, and we'll be happy to tell you more about the Union. We are all very enthusiastic about it. To our guests as well, thank you so much for coming. Thank you for participating. And again, if you do happen to catch any of the committee members in the bar afterwards, we're all very enthusiastic with our 200th anniversary coming up. We're all very enthusiastic to talk about both the past and the future of the Union. So again, thank you for coming. Now, the doors through which you leave are significant. As you noticed, you voted when you came in. We'll also be voting, of course, on our way out. The door on the right is ayes, so if you agree with the motion, this House believes that too many businesses are only paying lip service to the green agenda. Please leave through the door on the right. The door on the left is noes if you believe that the motion has failed. We will be announcing votes in the bar, so without further ado, I look forward to joining you there.